everyone, and thank you for joining the Volunteer Technologist podcast, where we look at the various different ways that technology happens behind the scenes of our day-to-day lives and the people who are donating their technical skills to making other things happen. Today, I am joined by Tom Rossi, the co-founder of Higher Pixels, and we'll let Tom introduce himself.
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, I'm Tom Rossi, and I'm one of the co-founders of Higher Pixels. We're a software development company, and the product that we spend most of our time on is Buzzsprout, which is a podcast hosting platform, and that's how you and I connected. And I'm happy to, be able to help and be a part of what you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So, one of the things I like to focus on here is the way those of us that have varying technical knowledge, how we volunteer and that knowledge comes into play in that. So what kind of volunteer work related to technology are you into?
Right now, most of the stuff that I'm doing is related to either being available for nonprofits that I'm a part of. Like I'm on the board of several nonprofits, and they're reaching out with technical questions of setting up domain names and email and all those internet related things, and hopefully trying to avoid the, getting a printer to work type. those are the worst ones, but mostly helping out with nonprofits. And I really enjoy teaching. And so I teach every year. I teach the hour of code at my children's elementary school, which is a great way to, the kids, my kids, don't really understand too much of what I do. And so it's fun to be able to go there and talk about coding, and all the kids love coding. And so it's great for my kids to see other kids like what I do.
Yeah.
Makes them more interested in it. And so that's mostly what I do these days. But I've done a lot of volunteering over the years. I think it's a big part of how I want to spend my time, right? Like I want some part of my time to be investing in something that's bigger than just my business or just what I'm getting paid for. And so we've done things like teaching. We would teach Ruby on Rails classes. I really enjoy teaching. And so we put together, a couple of us in the company put together a little free class where we just would teach it one night at we've done it at a couple different places, but the most recent couple times we did it at a local pub, and we just set up a room in the back and we were teaching Ruby on Rails coding. It was like a coding class. It was once a week. And, that's a lot of fun. I really enjoy stuff like that.
That sounds really cool. I think it might be good to kind of dig into some of the different teaching you've done, and the hour of code stuff sounded really interesting. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So the hour of code is something that started, I don't know how many years ago. Maybe within the last 5 or 10 years. And the idea is to inspire kids younger to look at coding. And so it goes all the way down to maybe, I think they have lessons that go all the way as like third grade, where you can teach them concepts. And there's a website, code.org, which is full of resources that are free to help people learn coding. And kids, man, they just get into it. You can tell you'll have a group of 20 kids, and there'll be a certain number of kids where they're in their flow state, where they lock in on whatever the exercise is, and they just love it. And then you have some kids that are like, they just don't get it. Like, I'm not interested in this. I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this right now? But man, they really can understand harder concepts than you typically think. And so my favorite, if anybody is thinking about it, code.org has tons of resources. One of them is Code Combat. And that's my favorite, where you're writing Python code for a warrior, and you have to, like, every level you have to solve the puzzle by writing the code for how the warrior is going to do it. And kids love it, and it's actually a great way to hone your own skills, because you can do all kinds of refactoring and come up with your own methods of coding, and then you can put your warrior into a combat against other coders, and so then your warriors fight. And it's really cool.
And that is really cool. For the For the ones who you said don't seem to really either get it or aren't truly interested, have you found any interesting ways of helping them either have that mental twig for how things work or seeing why it's helpful to them even if they don't want to be a programmer later?
It's tough. They definitely understand the concept of how code makes everything work, but they just don't love it. I think they probably approach it the way they might approach other subjects in school that maybe they're just not that interested in. Whereas some kids, they think it's a game. Like they're asking, how can I do this when I get home, right? How can I spend more time writing code? Whereas other kids are, not as much. But
Yeah,
it's
that makes sense.
I don't know. I think it's definitely possible that as they get older, they're going to catch the vision for it. But I don't know any magic that I've been able to come up with of like, no, think about it this way.
Yeah, I
So,
totally understand that. One of the things I've learned is that much like some of the math classes or English classes or others that we've taken in school, learning the concepts of coding is practical in so many other places because of the problem solving and the logic aspects of it. You don't have to have any desire to do it later, but understanding those concepts is incredibly helpful.
mm-hmm. And I think there's people that are naturally drawn towards problem solving and Legos type building, where you're building little blocks and then you're putting them together to create something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's trying to really get into that. And I'll say this too, because so code.org, the idea is to make it accessible at earlier ages, which they've done, and also to both genders, so guys and girls, boys and girls can get into coding, and so they make it attractive to both. And I've done it for a number of years, and I can honestly say like there's no gender disparity. It's not like
Really cool.
all the boys are into it and all the girls aren't. Like there are definitely girls that get into it, and there's boys that don't want to do it. So it was interesting. I totally thought that it would be all boys the first time I did it. And actually I did it, and it was my son's class. And so I knew a bunch of the boys, and I was surprised at just how many girls they loved it.
That's really cool. I know you said it goes all the way down to about third grade. What kind of age groups of kids have you been working with?
The most recent one that I did was third grade, and that's why
wow.
I think it's the youngest.
That's really cool. I actually didn't realize that it started that early. I knew they did something in the elementary time frame, but I didn't realize it was all the way down to third grade now. That's really cool.
Yeah, they go down to about, I can't remember what they go down to, but I know that the stuff that I did with them was actually on code.org at the 6th grade level, but I did it with third graders and they loved it.
Very cool. On some of the other teachings that you've done, has that been, I think you said one of the other ones you did was some Ruby on Rails with, like the last one I think you said was at a pub. What kind of experience has that been, and how does that compare to working with the kids?
It was fun. You have adults, you can go deeper, you get, really complicated questions. The problem is they're not paying for it.
Yeah.
And so they're not as committed to it. And so you'll have people that are there and then they're not there. And so it makes it really difficult to build on something. So it was fun, but I don't feel like it was, it didn't totally scratch the itch for me. And so the next time we do it, which the last time we did it was before COVID. And so we don't have any dates or anything, but the next time we do it, we'll definitely charge something from now on, like just to make it so that there's some buy-in.
Yeah.
To get
it's amazing what even like a $10 registration fee does for people having to buy into anything.
Yeah. Even if it's just $10. So I think, the aspects of doing something in a volunteer capacity, when it comes to not having commitment or buy-in from the people that you're working with, right? Like I think it takes a specific skill set even for an organization to engage volunteers. And you look at what makes it so that volunteers run away from it, right? Like code.org is a great example. They do an excellent job of providing you with all the resources that you need to go out and do what you need to do. If they didn't do that, if you couldn't get access to it, I mean, it would have never taken off. Yeah. And so figuring out how can we engage the community whenever we're going to engage with volunteers, how do we turn that into something that we're not consuming them, using them up, and then they never want to come back and volunteer again.
Totally makes sense. Shifting gears just a little bit, you said you do a bit of work with various nonprofits. What kind of things have you been doing with those? I know you said you're trying to avoid the printer help, which I certainly don't blame you for there.
Yeah.
But what kind of things have you been doing in that realm?
So we actually have a product called Donor Tools, which is donation tracking for nonprofits. And so a lot of times I'm helping them just get how are they going to process their donations? How are they going to, what are they going to do with those checks when they come in? How are they going to set up their website? How are they going to set up their email? Mostly getting connected up on the internet, and then helping them just with leading the organization. Like I really enjoy leadership topics, and I enjoy, like I was talking about, being able to lead volunteers, which most nonprofits have a volunteer arm. And so how do you engage those volunteers so that you can then in turn engage whatever your ministry is? And so those are typically the things that I'll do when I'm helping out with nonprofits.
That's very cool. Because I have a feeling some people don't really realize how much tech is involved in a nonprofit. What kind of pieces or aspects of tech have you seen in the nonprofits that you're working with, other than just like having to have a website? Yes, I think everybody understands that people have to have a website, but I'm not sure that people even understand what that really means as far as the work that goes into some of that kind of things or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it can get really complicated. Just like I think any organization, as it grows, it just has a lot of complications in how you manage relationships, for example. Like relationship management is huge. And so having some type of CRM, and there aren't any that I've come across that I really think are easy for nonprofits to be able to use. Typical nonprofit will have volunteers that come and go. So you might have a volunteer, they might be committed, they might be awesome, but they're only going to be there for a year or 2 years, right? And so if you have a really complicated piece of software and you have volunteers using it, then the chances of another volunteer being able to come in and hit the ground running are slim to none. And CRMs are a great example of it. It's just so complicated. Donation tracking. That's why Donor Tools, when we built that, we want it to be really simple. Actually, Buzzsprout, our podcast host, was built with the same idea. So we originally built that, and it was for churches. The majority of our customers were churches, and they have volunteers that are volunteering. They're a tech person in the church that, somebody engaged to upload the recording to Buzzsprout. But we had to build it in such a way that if that guy, gets hit by a bus or just stops, volunteering, that somebody else can step in and be able to do the same thing. And so helping organizations kind of manage relationships, manage their volunteers, and do it in a way that's simple. That's not challenge. That's not easy.
Yeah, that what you just described with the people at a church who are uploading a podcast, that was a verbatim of me. I was that volunteer, and that's actually how I learned about Buzzsprout, and then how we ended up eventually getting connected was through that exact process. And I've actually moved on from that particular church now and had to hand off the Buzzsprout bits to somebody else. And so I can, you were basically telling my story in that part.
Yeah.
So I can totally relate to where you're coming from on that. And I've lived that kind of scenario of volunteers come and go, and the tech still needs to work, and you've got to show somebody brand new how to do something, or they've got to figure it out on their own because there's nobody to do a handoff. A lot of volunteer organizations, that handoff that you might have in business doesn't necessarily ever happen because you need a new person because the other person's just not there anymore.
Yeah, you could say the standard for ease of use is maybe a little bit higher, especially in small nonprofits that are volunteer driven. If it's not easy to use, they're going to have a difficult time when their volunteers turn over, which volunteers are going to turn over. It's okay. That's not a bad indicator of the health of the organization. It's just natural that it's going to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we were talking about using Buzzsprout just a moment ago and how y'all created it initially for a focus on churches, and that's how I learned about it. Can you tell me a little more about how Buzzsprout came to be, or some of the story behind it?
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's funny, as I was thinking about the podcast today, and I was thinking back of my volunteering experience, it's interesting that volunteering is really what ultimately led to Buzzsprout in a convoluted way, because way back in the when I was younger, in the mid 90s, I was a Young Life leader, and Young Life is a campus ministry that's heavily volunteer led, and I did that, and I was the guy who was helping out with all the technology stuff, right? And so meanwhile, our company has been formed and we're getting into technology. And I keep seeing over and over again, I'm helping them do the same thing. They're trying to upload some photos. They want to put up a calendar. And this is the 90s. So this is like before Facebook. This is before, this is Angel Fire for the old people
Oh,
that are out
yeah.
there, right? Angel Fire and GeoCities, stuff like that. But what happened was we're like, man, we should just build a product. We should build something that these organizations that are that are heavily relying on volunteers can use to be able to build a simple website. And so that led to a product called M-Sites, which we ran for until we started it in probably 2001, 2002, and we just shut it down at the end of last year, at the end of 2021. And that was geared towards campus ministries or campus organizations that had pictures and calendars and all that kind of stuff. Well, what happened was those guys, you end up helping them a ton with the product, with the M-Sites product. You're helping them with their website, but then they're also asking you about other things like, hey, what about email? We need to get email set up. And so you're helping them out, get their email going. Not really part of the M-Sites, but you're just helping them out because they're your customers. And then those M-Sites people ended up moving on to be church pastors. And they're like, hey, I understand how M-Sites works. Can I just keep using it for my church? And so over a period of time, next thing you know, our M-Sites customer base gets to be a lot of churches, not campus ministries anymore. So now we're serving churches with this product. And inevitably, the question comes up of, how do I get my sermons online?
Mm-hmm.
And so we keep hearing the question. And my partner, Kevin, was constantly updating this document of like how to build an RSS feed and how to upload your MP3s to GoDaddy or DreamHost, like these old, just file servers that were connected to the internet.
And that's when you had to build the RSS feed by hand too. That's not just magically created for you like it is in most tools now.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what we were doing, is showing them how to manually build an RSS feed and link to their sermon audio, right? That had to be encoded correctly and to, not just destroy their internet when somebody tries to download it. And so we were constantly updating this document. And finally we're like, we should just build a product, right? Because what we're doing, this is a podcast. They're not calling it a podcast, but what we should do is build a podcasting tool. We should make it really, really easy. So again, you got a volunteer who doesn't understand how to build an RSS feed and doesn't understand audio encoding, but they can upload a recording. They could just take a WAV file off of their, church computer and upload it. And so that became Buzzsprout. It actually came through a convoluted way of us initially volunteering in different campus ministries, which led to M-Sites. And then that led to people wanting to be able to put their sermons online, which led to Buzzsprout, so that now they can upload sermons. And when we launched Buzzsprout, I remember it was kind of a fun launch because you already have customers. So when we launched it, you already have people that are using it. And so I'm watching all these, uploads happen. And next thing you know, we're seeing uploads from all over the world, different types of content, right? It wasn't just for church sermons.
Mm-hmm.
It was a podcasting tool. And this was maybe 2008. And so it was still early in the podcasting world, in the podcasting timeline, but there were tons of podcasts that started signing up for Buzzsprout, and they were attracted to the same thing that was attractive for the nonprofits, which was, it was just so simple to be able to do. They didn't have to worry about a lot of the things that back then you had to deal with.
You didn't need to be an audio engineer or a web technologies engineer to be able to just get a simple podcast out the door.
Exactly. That was what we used to tell people all the time, because the old podcasters would have a hard time with it because they enjoyed the tech. They enjoyed, manually encoding their audio, where I'm like, man, Buzzsprout's not for you. Buzzsprout is for the person who says, I never want to think about it. I just want industry standards. I want to upload something and just have it work.
That's so true of pioneers in any technical field. Is part of what drove them to be a pioneer in a particular field is the same stuff that other people don't really want to do. The rest of the population, myself included sometimes, we want the simplified, easy button version of what made them really happy. We want them to wrap all that up in some logic that we don't have to understand and just let me push a button.
Yeah. What's interesting about it is that person who initially just wants the button, then they get used to the button, and then they want another button.
Yeah.
And now they want a text field, and now they want a drop down. And so this isn't really about volunteering and technology, but it's definitely software, is that we have a user base that as they mature, as they use the product more and more, they ask for more complicated features, forgetting that when they first got there, the reason that they loved it was because it was so easy. And so if I gave you all those complicated things that you want, you would have never signed up from the beginning.
I'm definitely not guilty of that one. I've never put in a feature request for something that is the antithesis of the simple, easy process of Buzzsprout or any other tool. I've never done that. No, never.
Yeah. I think it's natural, right? Like, because you get used to it. And so, man, if it just did this one thing, it's just this one thing. The problem is there's a million of you that all have a one thing that you want, and it's not the same one thing.
Yeah. Well, in working in technology myself, I know that there's only so many hours in the day that you can put toward engineering, the software engineering that goes into tools and products. And with that limited time, you have to focus it somewhere, because if you don't, you end up with a bunch of half-baked things. Aside from the fact that you don't want a million different options in a single tool, you also don't want 500,000 half-baked options.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about it a lot. So we're very intentional about how we build features. We take a lot of time to make sure that we're asking all those questions. Like, do we really need to do this? Do we really need to build this? If we give them this option, is it just going to be confusing, or is it actually going to serve the end goal of making it as easy as possible for someone to be able to build and host and monetize their podcast? And that's where you start. And there's a lot of argument and debate that goes into it.
Just to kind of bring things back around a little bit too, that same set of questions about, is it easy to use and does it really solve the problem? Is the people we're actually trying to serve, will they actually care about this and benefit from it? Those are the same questions we have to ask when doing volunteer work. Or like when I was working on technology in a church site, is my congregation actually going to care about this? From what I know about my congregation, is this too complex for them? Or are they just going to look at it, throw their hands up, and call the church office? Because this is too complicated. And at that point, you haven't actually solved anything. You've just made it harder on the tech team. Or the tech team spent a bunch of time doing something that doesn't actually bear out. And I think that most likely holds true with the vast majority of nonprofits and other places we might volunteer our time. Is we've got to be careful that we don't take the things that we're SMEs on and try and make this super geeky version of it for them. We need to take what we know and help them get to where their particular audience actually needs to be.
Yeah.
Whether that's a church or anybody else or fire department or, whatever.
Yeah. I think as technologists, we typically are opinionated. We have strong opinions.
We definitely have strong opinions.
And so then you go in and you're trying to help a nonprofit, right? And they say, whatever, we need a website. We need help with our website. And what's the first thing we do? It's like, oh, well, you need to change your technology. It's the wrong technology. You built this in JavaScript, and I'm going to build it in Ruby on Rails. We just come in and have these requirements, which makes it difficult. And then now every change that they make to their website has to go through you, which doesn't really serve the organization, right? It just makes them so that they're dependent on you. And you see these nonprofits where their website changes drastically every year. And it's because that's what's happening is they got a new volunteer, totally new technology for their website.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
I think too, what you were saying goes back to what motivates us to volunteer. What's the motivation? And I think there is a connection between our skills, our talents, those things that we do that we enjoy. And then what we want to do is help. We want to see that talent invested in something where the return isn't monetary. It's not a monetary return. It's a return some other way. But if I invest it in a nonprofit and then it falls on deaf ears, right? Like you go and you do something, but nobody in the organization cares that you did it. Well, that's not motivating as a volunteer.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You want to see your skills come to bear in a way that positively impacts whatever the organization is that you're volunteering with.
I know with me, a lot of the motivation to do the volunteering is just that motivation to give back to organizations that in one way or another have either helped me or that I see the value in the help they're providing to someone else or the services they're providing to someone else. And at the end of the day, it's got to be rewarding for both sides or beneficial to both sides for it to be a good engagement or a good relationship.
Yeah.
Both sides need to get something from it. The organization needs to get something that actually solves a problem that they care about. And the volunteers got to get something out of it psychologically or otherwise to make it worth their time to want to actually do it.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of times what the volunteer wants is to know that it's valuable to the organization. Mm-hmm. That's all that I need. If I know that you value this thing that I'm going to do, whether I'm going to go fix your printer. If I'm going to fix your printer and it's going to make you happy and your staff has a bunch of printing and they can tell, oh man, we're doing this thing and now we can print it. Like that just makes it much easier to volunteer, where instead of you do something and it just falls on deaf ear, nobody cares.
And to stretch that printer analogy or scenario one bit farther, since we've talked about churches so much, sometimes it's not just the printer that a lot of us think of that's maybe sitting on a desk somewhere. It's, the connectivity to the big printer copier is messing up and we need to print bulletins for Sunday.
Yeah.
And we've got 200 or 300 bulletins, or if you're in a big church, maybe 1,000 bulletins that you need to get printed. And it's like, nobody's going to have any idea what's going on if we can't figure out a way to get this printed. So
Right.
Sometimes it really is the thing that makes the biggest impact to them is going and doing that thing that as a technologist you might loathe doing, but you've got the skills to help them with that. And then hopefully get to do more interesting things the rest of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think the way that it typically plays out, right? Is that they need help with something. You go in to help with that something, and then you get connected with them and you find these other areas that you can really make an impact.
Like so many other things, it's all about finding a way to have a foot in the door so that you've get past that initial introduction and people actually say, oh, this isn't Johnny come lately. This person really does know some stuff. They really might be able to help us with this, that, or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, and wanted to give you a moment to share anything that you wanted to share with the audience just in general, or ways that they might reach out to you if they wanted to contact you afterwards, or anything else.
Sure. You can reach me on Twitter, TomRossi7, and appreciate just the opportunity to be able to be on the podcast and hopefully inspire other people to volunteer and find ways to use our technological skill set to, benefit others.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thanks, Gene.
Have a wonderful day. You've been listening to the Volunteer Technologist podcast. This is a value for value podcast, which means I'll never charge you to listen. That said, producing and hosting it does cost money. If you got value from today's show, then I hope you'll consider contributing to its ongoing production by sending a boost with a new podcast app such as Fountain, or via the Buy Me a Coffee link on volunteertechnologist.com/contribute. You can find show notes, transcripts, and links to the things talked about in today's episode at volunteertechnologist.com. Thanks for listening.